Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Cannane. Coming up, the parliamentary debate on Afghanistan continues, but do the Afghan people want Australian troops to stay? A call for a new debate on the legalisation of drugs comes from an unlikely source, and why the churches don't want ethics classes competing with Scripture. Our panel tonight, former New South Wales Liberal leader Kerry Chikarovski, blogger and author Antony Loewenstein, and in Canberra, our political editor Chris Uhlmann. First up tonight, James Packer's surprise raid on Channel 10. It's been a few years since the media mogul sold his stake in the Nine network, and most commentators thought he'd decided to get out of free-to-air TV for good. Now it's expected he will announce tomorrow he's taken up 19.9% of the 10 network. That's the maximum amount of one investor can hold before launching a takeover bid. Joining us to explain what all this means is the editor of the Financial Review's Chanticleer column, Tony Boyd. Hi, Tony.
Hi, Steve.
Why would James Packer be back in the TV industry? I mean, everyone thought 2 years ago that he was out of it, that he was in gaming now. He wasn't interested in media anymore.
Well, there's two reasons. One is that the free-to-air television stations are the first to benefit from a recovery in the economy. Advertising there grows faster than any other sector of the economy, so he's picked a good time to buy into this company. Secondly, the general consensus is this company's not well managed. It's earning about 200 million EBITDA, whereas Channel 7 and Channel 9 are both earning about 300 million. So you've got to ask the question, why are they earning 1.5 times more than Channel 10?
In your column today, you said that Channel 10 should brace themselves for some Kerry Packer-style Bunsen burner treatment.
Yes, well, that's the smaller version of the blowtorch, and I think they can definitely expect to be put under pressure. I mean, James Packer will be demanding board seats, and we've seen with other media moguls like Kerry Stokes that you can actually get control of a board and a company without launching a full takeover offer, which happened in Western Australia.
And does James Packer apply the Bunsen burner like his father?
Well, look, I think he's made a move that has surprised everyone. So the talk in investment banking circles is that he's back. He's doing something that no one had expected, and if he's successful in this, he'll make a lot of money.
The talk is also that their news department could be under fire. There was plans by Channel 10 to set up a further news bulletin around 6 o'clock to basically go from 5 till 7:30 with their news. Surely that could be under the gun.
Well, I mean, with stations like this and the other commercial networks already offering a feast of current affairs and news, why would you put on 2.5 hours of current affairs when it's a station whose bread and butter was the youth market? And, I mean, MasterChef, surely more of that'd do well, wouldn't it?
What's an intriguing development in this too, I think, is that David Gyngell, his best mate, runs Channel 9. There's going to be a bit of a personal battle, isn't there?
Well, I suppose their interests might well be aligned. I mean, a better performing Channel 10 without any competition in news and current affairs could well help Channel 9. But I'd say he's seeking counsel from all of the people that are able to provide advice on the media.
Harold Mitchell made some comments on News 24 today. He said that it was a smart move by James Packer. He said he sold at the top of the market and now he's buying him at the bottom. Is that the way you see it?
Well, I think if the company can lift its profit to 300 million and cut its costs, which are believed to be far too high, then he will do well. And also, he's setting himself up in an asset that could do very well with the NBN. We're talking about, IPTV, the delivery of content into people's homes on computers. I mean, the sort of assets he's got with that particular channel are very attractive for young people.
Tony Boyd, thanks for coming in on The Drum.
Thanks, Steve.
Well, the debate on the war in Afghanistan continues in the federal parliament. Tasmanian independent and former army officer Andrew Wilkie became very emotional today as he spoke out against that conflict.
You died serving your country, and I salute you. You died serving your country, and I salute you. May you rest in peace. And may my new colleagues in this place see the sense in ending this now, before too many more young Australians are sent to their deaths. Thank you.
It was a chance today for MPs of all political persuasions to have their say, some arguing it was time for Australian troops to be brought home.
It is time to bring the troops home safely and for Australia to shoulder the burden of Afghanistan's problems in a new way. And it's time to bring the troops home so they can be honoured for their service and no longer be asked to carry out this unjustified task.
We have a responsibility to Afghanistan and to our allies and partners to remain committed. We have a responsibility to the fallen to continue the task. But most importantly, we have a responsibility to the Australian people to ensure that we protect Australia's national interests. And that is what we are doing in Afghanistan. Australia and Australians should expect no less of us.
I recall that I was stopped dead in my speech by a number of female protesters in the public gallery who removed their clothes to display the word peace written across their breasts. Perhaps it's the only time any speech I've ever made has evoked such a passionate response.
Warren Truss sounding a little bit disappointed there. Well, there was a number of voices in the parliament today speaking on the issue of Afghanistan. Chris Uhlmann, I guess Andrew Wilkie's speech was probably the most significant. We saw a bit of the emotion before in his speech today.
Yeah, he was very emotional about it, and that's because he went through the trouble of naming all 21 Australians who've died in Afghanistan since 2001, and that's the point at which he became very emotional. And he's pointed out in the past too that some of the ones who've died recently are from his old battalion, so he feels this very passionately. That's obvious. He feels it very deeply and personally, and he said that the two major parties were perpetuating what he called the great lie about Afghanistan, that on balance he was in favour of the US alliance, but that the reasons for being in Afghanistan had long ago evaporated, and rather than being there for 10 years or having some sort of presence there for 10 years, he'd be concerned if we were still there in 10 months' time.
Kerry, Andrew Wilkie does have that background in the army. He's a former lieutenant colonel. He's in favour of the US alliance. He was in favour of the invasion in 2001. Does his argument carry more weight because of his background?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting that he's one of the very few military, serving or otherwise, who's actually saying this. If you actually look around and talk to people who are either in the military now, which you'd expect them to be supporting it, but even people who've left, there aren't too many people who are saying we should be pulling out of Afghanistan. And certainly, I mean, it must be extremely difficult to talk about people who you know and who you served with and who are now no longer with us. So I wonder sometimes whether that's kind of clouding his judgment. Maybe he is so wrought about this whole thing that he's not actually looking at what the government has to do and what the opposition say they're doing, and that is looking at the bigger picture and the greater interest of the nation.
Antony, what did you make of Andrew Wilkie's speech?
It was moving. I mean, there's no doubt one can't but be moved by what Wilkie has said. I suppose there's a few things that one should point out about this debate which I think often are forgotten. One, that in poll after poll, a vast majority of Australians are opposed to it. It doesn't mean in itself that makes the war wrong, but most Australians don't want us to be there in the current form. And secondly, picking up on what Senator Stephen Smith just said, Minister Stephen Smith, that he said that we're essentially there for national security reasons. And the truth is that virtually every single terrorism expert, including a recent report by an American academic, found that the vast majority of terrorism directed at the West, Australia, America, elsewhere, is because we occupy Muslim lands. Not because they hate us for our freedoms or because of what we say, what we do. It doesn't in itself mean we shouldn't be there, but the point being that occupation comes at the price. And to suggest that by being there and staying there, we're actually making the chance of terrorism less, we're actually increasing the chance of terrorism affecting us here and elsewhere.
Chris, any other significant contributions today on the floor in this debate?
Adam Bandt, of course, spoke again today, and again he was on the same side as Andrew Wilkie, and he made the point that he thought that there should be a vote in Parliament before there was any move to go to war in any way, shape or form. But I would point out too that although people say that there are people attacking Western countries because we occupy Islamic lands, that wasn't the justification that was used in the attack on September 11 or the one in Bali. There are other reasons and there are always other causes, and I guess the questions that arise in the mind of any government. We also have made this circumstance here, and so it is incumbent upon the government to do something which is lasting before it leaves. So, but above everything else, I think that it's probably the US alliance that drives this government and this opposition to stay put, and that's because they value that very highly.
Kerry, Chris mentioned there Adam Bandt's plan to introduce a private member's bill so that no Prime Minister can send troops off to war without first putting that to the Parliament. What do you think of that move?
Look, I actually disagree with that entirely. I think that has to be a decision of the executive government, and the reason I think is for A couple of things. One, there may be exigent circumstances so that you can't recall a parliament, get them all come back, debate the thing. We may actually have to move more quickly than that. So I think that's probably, for that reason, it's not good. But I also think that these are very difficult decisions. And you use the example of all these people saying we shouldn't be in Afghanistan. If you actually look at the polling on things like the death penalty, there's a lot of people, overwhelmingly the majority of people think we should have the death penalty. But governments, and particularly executive governments, have some very difficult decisions to make at time. And I just don't think that the decision to go to war is one which could be sat around and debated for weeks on end.
Antony, your response to that?
I, of course, disagree. Well, of course. I shouldn't say of course, but I mean, the idea...
We wouldn't be on these panels if we agreed with it all the time, would we?
I mean, the idea somehow that there shouldn't be the most robust debate about going to war. And Kerry's point that if there's an immediate urgency to send troops to something, if there's some national security emergency, presumably there's an exception, one can do that. But we've seen the last 10 years alone with Afghanistan and arguably more with Iraq, the speed with which Australian troops were sent there by the Howard government in both those cases, particularly with Iraq, showed that there was not the most appropriate, robust discussion why we were there. The intelligence that was used for that war was false, either knowingly or otherwise. We may never find that out. So the idea that there shouldn't be at least a discussion of all parliamentarians about should we be in a conflict zone or not, and the US alliance is always used as the catch-all argument, we should be there because of the US alliance. In the US, they are talking now about giving passes to Taliban leaders to talk to the Americans to try and end this conflict in some way. So there's actually already a disconnect between what's being discussed in Parliament here and what's actually happening on the ground in Afghanistan.
Steve, could I just raise one other point too? And this is not offering a justification for any of these wars, but don't forget the Howard government also acted with speed in East Timor and was demanded that they did act with speed in East Timor against the wishes of the US alliance. In fact, John Howard trying to get a photo opportunity with Bill Clinton at that stage was almost impossible. And they managed to manufacture one at a meeting in New Zealand. So on occasions, governments act swiftly, and in hindsight, people think they should have.
Antony, is that a reasonable justification for not debating these things before you send troops off to other countries?
Timor is an interesting example, and there's no doubt that that was done with the speed. And, I mean, we shouldn't forget the Howard government didn't go necessarily by choice. I mean, they essentially were forced after massive public opposition to the current status quo at the time, but that's a separate issue. No, I disagree that there should not be a robust parliamentary and public debate about sending troops to war. To simply use the excuse again because a US president comes calling is not a good enough reason.
Yeah, Kerry, quick comment for you.
My concern is that, in terms of a debate in the Parliament, what sort of information would be made public in that debate, which in fact could compromise any military action?